You're listening to the Max Planck Lawcast, which showcases the academic research currently being conducted across the Max Planck Law Network. I'm your host, Christopher Murphy, and together we'll be talking to some of the more than 400 researchers who are pushing the frontiers of legal knowledge in Germany and abroad. When it comes to new and exciting legal research, the Lawcast has you covered. Well, welcome to the Max Planck Lawcast. Being a child of Generation X, I have to admit that I have a certain soft spot for the quintessential slacker. Hell, back then being a slacker was a badge of honor. Bleak, cynical, reluctant to grow up and get a 9-to-5 job, the slacker was all the rage. But what if we fast forward the tape to the mid-2020s? And yes, you've now settled down, you've got a house, a family, and you've succumbed to the 9-to-5 job. The problem is that there's one colleague at work, let's just call him Davo, and he stayed true to his roots and remained a slacker. Davo does sloppy work, he turns up late, he leaves early, and gets by doing the bare minimum. But Davo receives the same wage as you and your other colleagues. Is this fair? Should you complain? Or should you devise a cunning plan to take some of Davo's pay and divide it amongst the non-slackers instead? Well, on today's episode, we'll be discussing an interesting project that simulates exactly this situation by giving volunteers the chance to vote on whether they should take money from one another based on their performance in a game. This is obviously all in the name of science, to garner a better understanding of how voting on a given norm affects our moral compass. To do all this, I'm joined today by Mahdi Khesali. Mahdi is writing his PhD at the Max Planck Institute for Research on Collective Goods in Bonn. Mahdi, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
No, it's great to have you here. And I must say, the Max Planck Institute for Research on Collective Goods, that's one of the shorter Max Planck names. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
So, tell me, you're running a game designed to assess what you refer to as conflict of norms. For me, I guess this concept sounds a little foreign. So could you explain what exactly a conflict is and provide a few examples of the norms involved?
Yeah, sure. Let me start with a very abstract definition, and then I give you some examples so it makes it more clear. So through the course of the human history, we developed various normative systems to govern our behavior. These systems prescribe the most appropriate behavior in a certain situation. So what's the most appropriate way to behave in a specific context? Since these systems pursue different goals, the norms that might suggest for why these systems may differ from each other, and sometimes comes to also a conflict. We typically refer to these conflicts or these situations as a dilemma. So you start our talk with an example which can be considered as a dilemma. On the one hand, there is a norm that you should not steal from the other people. On the other hand, there is also another norm that people should be treated fairly. So apparently, it's a dilemma here. Another example that we might face is that when we see a poor kid steals out of the hunger. So the question here is that, do we really want to punish him? Or do we really want to close our eyes and easily say that, okay, nothing happened? So we can also increase the picture and look at it from the social perspective as well. So an example here would be a civil disobedience. Yeah. In a civil disobedience, on the one hand, we have orders in the society which we should respect. On the other hand, these are rights of the people in the play. So to summarize what I've said, if we can look at our daily life, we see many situations where making a decision is difficult. So we don't know which route should we take. So these are the situations that we call a conflict of the norms.
Okay. And they're in some ways classic moral dilemmas as well, as you say.
Absolutely. But in a moral dilemma, usually you have two moral norms conflicting each other, but that can also goes beyond the conflict between two moral norms that can come to the fact that your moral norms conflict with the social norms, especially when you migrate from one country to another country.
Okay, understood. All right. Now we've known a little bit here about the conflicts and examples of norms there. Let's talk more about what your game simulation tried to find out, or we'll get to that shortly, but let's maybe talk about the setting here of the simulation and how many participants you had involved.
Yeah, sure. But I want to use this chance to describe what exactly we are doing.
Yeah, sure thing.
So basically, traditional legal scholarship doesn't have tools to answer all types of the questions. So if we divide the questions to the normative and positive questions, legal scholarship has a tool to answer a normative question, but the positive questions remain unanswered here. So what do we refer to? Our understanding from the positive questions is that the questions that are about real world, how the real world works, and what are the causal relationship there. So typically, traditional legal scholarship doesn't have any tools to answer this question. The usual path to take in a law department is that we make some assumptions about how people usually behave, but we never test that if these assumptions are correct or not. This is where the interdisciplinary studies like law and economics or law and psychology come to play. So they are there to check that if these assumptions are valid or not. So we borrow methods from other social science to answer questions that we cannot really answer using a typical legal method.
Okay.
So one of these tools that developed first in psychology and then economists start using it as well is experiment. Basically, as it sounds, we invite people to the lab and we ask them to play some kind of a game. And what we try to do is that we try to replicate the real situation, what you see in the real world, in the lab, following certain standards. So these standards help us to, first, we can say something meaningful about the real world. And second, our results that we find, it's according to the principles of the social sciences. So again, you described the situation at the beginning of our talk, and I'm going to refer to that situation. And I'm going to say that we are trying to replicate the same scenario in our lab.
Okay.
So basically, we invite around 200 people and give them the money and ask them to play some game.
Okay, you're actually giving them money, cash?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we give the cash to the people and give them the chance to steal from each other. Or
where do I sign up? This sounds good.
Yeah. So you can also come to our lab
Sure
and
thing.
pay you.
It depends how much cash is involved. Okay, so right, you're giving them cash and you're telling them to come here to the lab. And how many people have you had thus far, or participants?
Yeah, so we invited around 200 people. That gives us 102 observations that we have, but our plan is to collect more data at the end of the summer.
Okay. Are you having trouble getting participants, or is it okay offering them the cash? Because I know often is a bit of a struggle in the scientific community to find enough participants for studies like this.
I should say that sometimes it's challenging because our design is a little bit specific, but usually you can get enough people for your experiment, but sometimes it's also challenging. So that's a part of the job, isn't it?
Sure thing. Yeah, understood. Well, then tell us then about the game and the experiment itself. What are the participants required to do when they arrive?
So when the participant arrive in our lab, they receive some money. So they can lose this money in the course of the game. So they come to the lab, they are divided into the group of 6 people. And they, as I said, they receive the money. And in this group, they pair with each other, and they're supposed to compete with each other in what economists call a real effort task. So you have to invest some time to do a task.
Okay.
And the task that they're going to do is the counting a zero in the tables.
Okay, how's that work?
So basically, you receive a matrix, and a matrix contains around 150 numbers, 1 and 0. And you're supposed to count the number of the zeros in the tables and with the answers. So it's really time consuming.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. But I'm guessing there is a time limit as well to counting the zeros.
Yes, 5 minutes they have.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so they count their zeros and then they lock in how many zeros they think they've found in the game. What happens next?
So they compete with each other with the number of the puzzles or number of tables that they can solve.
Okay. So if they correctly guess in the first table or puzzle there's 35 zeros, then they move on to the next puzzle too.
That's exactly the case. So,
okay, right.
And so they compete with each other in this task, and they, after these 5 minutes is over, they remain behind the veil of the ignorance. Basically, they don't know how many tables they have solved, and they also don't know which role they have. So then in this situation, we ask them if they are okay with the norm that tells other people, okay, you're allowed to steal, or to be accurate enough, you're allowed to take some money from other people to compensate what you have done.
Okay. As in, if you scored more highly, you should be able to take money from those who scored more lowly.
So, yes. But remember, they don't know which role they have. So basically, we have two roles in our game. We have a role of the taker and a role of the victim.
Okay.
So you either can be a taker, you can steal some money, or you can be a role of the victim. So they don't know.
Be on the receiving end, so to say.
Exactly.
Okay, and so you don't know where you're at that point in time when you're asked to vote on this. You've got no idea actually how well you performed or not.
Exactly, that's the case.
Okay. And so they then vote on this. And once they've voted, what happens then?
So when they vote, they are informed about their role. So they know that if they get the role of the taker or victim. So basically, those who perform better in the task, they receive the role of the taker. And those, let's say, it's not as good as their partner, they receive the role of the victim.
Okay.
And at this stage, takers have a chance to steal from their partner.
Okay. And right, I could imagine some people are a bit shocked when they're like, yeah, take the money. And then they're like, oh, I'm the victim.
So yes. So some people may plan to steal more from their partner, but they receive the role of the victim, unfortunately.
Ooh, yeah, exactly.
And not so fun, no?
No, exactly. I want to come back to actually how much money's stolen later on. First, now that I guess we know about the game itself, the role and how it all works, what are the central hypotheses that you're seeking to confirm or debunk here?
So basically what we are after is that how the voting changed the behavior. And in our scenario is the stealing behavior. Do you steal more or do you steal less when you vote such a norm? And also we are looking at the probability that you steal as well.
Okay. Does that also mean that there is a certain group who are not offered the vote at all, or is everyone offered the chance to vote?
No, basically because they don't know their role, they have an equal chance. So in a reality, you also always have a chance to vote on your norms and in a referendum.
Okay. Rightio. Well, don't go away, because after this short break, I'll be back with Mahdi to discuss whether Dave the Slacker gets to hang on to his money or not.
Welcome to Max Planck Law, one of the world's largest networks for legal research, based in Germany. Our world-class institutes invite applications for fully funded PhD and postdoc opportunities in almost any area of law. Join a thriving community of over 400 researchers in an international and interdisciplinary environment. Experience the high quality of life that Germany offers while collaborating with colleagues across institutes, working and writing in English. We provide you with unique specialist libraries, excellent workspaces, and support in developing your research and your academic career. Apply today. For more information, visit law.mpg.de.
Well, welcome back to the Lawcast. So, Mahdi, before the break, we talked a lot about the game there, the simulation, and also the hypothesis, what you're trying to prove. Let's talk findings. Did the takers invariably take money from the victims? And if so, perhaps in percentage terms, how much?
I would like to return the question and say that, what's your guess?
I guess it comes down to a number of variables, which I wanted to also ask about, but I'm guessing, yes, they took money because they did better and they voted to take money, so why would they not?
So you're right. On average, people decide to steal 60% of the, let's call it, earnings of their partners.
Okay.
And this is across all treatments. And by treatments, this is a term used in experimental economics and psychology, where you manipulate some reality to see the behavior. Here, in our case, is voting. So basically, in one treatment, we don't have a voting. And in other treatment, we have a voting. And we want to see the change, difference.
Right, I understand. Okay, right. So one treatment, there is no voting, but then you're told, hey, at the end, you've got the chance to take money. Would you like to? And then the other treatment is there's the vote, and then the same kind of end result. And you're looking, what's the difference by putting it to the vote? Do more people take money or not?
That's exactly the case. And that's how we claim a causality. That's the buzzword for the economists.
Okay. How many people decide then not to steal? Sounds like the majority decide to steal.
That's absolutely right. So less than a 20% decide to not steal when they have a chance to
Okay.
steal.
Wow.
So,
Okay. Well, that's quite an impressive result. Or I don't know what it says about us as humans, but it's interesting, that's for sure.
that's a good news for economists because they develop this general framework called rational choice theory. And based on the rational choice theory, you should steal in this game and you should steal all money of the other people.
Okay, right. Okay, so that's right. I'm given the chance. For me, there's no detriment. I can take this money.
Yeah. When you have a chance, you should.
Yeah, sure. I get it. Okay, right. Okay.
I'm not encouraging anybody to steal something, but I'm saying that this is what we see, and we should come clear with this reality.
Yes. Okay. Understandable. That's right. Yeah. Okay. I see. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to say there about the taking of the money, or before we move on, or in the percentage terms?
Yes, definitely. Here we want to also see that the effect of the voting. That was our main question. Although it's as such interesting to see that people do not behave as we expect or as we morally prescribe them to do so. So if they vote on the norm called the stealing norm, which I described it before, they steal 20% less. So basically means that the voting happening in our experiment has a positive effect. I don't want to say something morally laden, but people steal less when they vote on a norm.
Oh, okay.
Which is a good news, actually.
And so are they then more likely to steal, but they will steal less if they vote on the norm?
Exactly.
Okay. Right. Interesting. Yeah. There are 6 participants in each group, right?
Yes, that's the case.
What happens when they vote and say 3 threes? 3 vote to take money, 3 say, no, we shouldn't steal money. What do you do then?
That's not so much important for us because as our design is, we don't really implement any kind of norm. So we want to see just effect of the voting as such.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to see that if a majority decide, so we're going to punish everybody who steal. That's not the case in our experiment. We just want to see that the effect of the voting.
Okay. I see. Okay. It's purely the effect of voting. So the outcome in that sense is not irrelevant, but that's not important. It's just simply the vote itself and what change that brings.
Yes. But to just clarify a little bit here, we also control for the outcome that they see. So what that means for the lawyers is that when you do a statistics, you also take into account the fact that what number of the participants vote in favor and what number of the participants vote against that, also into the account and say control for the effect of that. So we control for the outcome as well. And still we see that there is an effect of the voting.
Okay. Talking about controlling and effects, what about gender? Does that play a role? I mean, you obviously have control for this.
Yes. So basically, we also control for an army of the demographics from gender to the educations, if they're employed or not. And to be honest, and this is not really good for us as a male, we see that the male participants steal more in comparison.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to say that, but there is still hope for us as well.
Oh, is that right?
The difference is not significant. What that means, because, hey, we are using a sample of the people. We are not looking at the whole population. So there is always a possibility that we make a mistake in our calculations. And the statistics also provide some tools to measure this mistake. And if the probability that making such a mistake is high, you get, so to speak, a warning that, hey, you might be making a mistake. This is how we describe the result are not significant. So that means that, okay, the probability that we make a mistake here is high. And the result regarding to the male stealing more, it's not significant, which is probably we're making a mistake.
I see. Okay. And when you say you get a warning, an internal warning from yourselves, or the statistical program says, not enough data here?
Yeah. So basically, a statistical program tells you what's the probability that the result that you're finding is a mistake.
Okay.
Usually, it tells you it's a 1% probability, 5% probability, 10% probability. And the tradition in economics and psychology is that higher than 10% of the probability is what we call insignificant results. We say that it's too high, it's too risky to accept this result.
Okay, right. And to get more information about that, you would actually have to, we're talking about involving thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in the study.
Yes, that's absolutely. But we don't have money for that as well.
No, that's right. Unless you send in some spies who are really good at the game and they keep taking the money from the victims. Maybe that's an idea. Although that probably won't be good for your scientific findings.
Yeah. So a strand of the literature called field experiment actually doing that. So that's also interesting.
Okay. All right. That brings me, I guess, to another question I have here then is whether the participants meet before the game. I guess the idea in my mind, I'm thinking, I meet up there and have a chat beforehand, think, oh yeah, he's pretty cool, or she's nice, and then you kind of go in there and maybe that will increase or maybe decrease the likelihood of taking money from people if you've kind of met them beforehand and depending on whether you have a positive or negative view of them.
So your intuition is absolutely right. The literature shows that even a little bit of the communications before experiment or during experiments can change your behavior during the experiment. But since our experiment is not about the communications or knowing each other, we try to control for that fact.
Okay.
So basically, we make sure that the participants do not talk to each other before the experiments or during the experiments. And we take these rules very seriously.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And then do they actually meet each other at the end?
They see each other at the end, but they see each other, but we ask them to not speak to each other as long as they are in the lab.
Okay.
But after the lab, we don't really care because they already made the decisions.
Yeah, certainly. Some leave with a smile on their face and others without.
I'm telling you, that's the reality. You see that.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we say goodbye to the participant at the end of the experiment. You see that some of them are a bit frowny.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah. Especially you're like, oh man, I did badly in the counting the zeros and they took all my money. This sucks.
Yes, that's the case.
I guess moving up now to broader questions, how do your findings then, thus far, I know you're still going with the study, but how do they apply then to real world situations?
So basically, our experiment shows that the people behave differently in the same context when there is a voting involved. So voting as such can change our behavior. And also there's the outcome of the voting. So in our experiments, the outcome of the voting doesn't change anything in the reality and doesn't change anything in the structure of the game. That means that the voting as such in our experiment sure has an effect. A concern that I have is that it's hard to argue that if this effect is stable over the time. So you might vote and you might change your behavior right after the voting. But if this behavior is stable over the time, that's the question that further studies should also try to answer. But it's hard to really isolate the effect over the time using the tools that's right now available for us.
Okay. When you say the effects, that's the effects on norms or moral decision making.
Exactly. The effect here, it would be that if you vote, you're going to behave more morally compared to the situation where they don't vote. So basically, it's a good news that you change your behavior directly after the voting, but it's also a matter of the question if this effect is going to last over the time.
And would that be something that you yourselves would be interested in finding out, or is that for another Max Planck Institute somewhere? Or?
No, definitely. I'm also interested to see that. But as I said, studying such an effect over the time, it's difficult because then there is so many other factors playing a role that controlling for all of that, as we control for demographics and communication in our experiment, it would be very hard.
Okay.
So maybe that's when I get in a position in academia that I can follow this path.
Yeah, certainly. I get it. Well, I got one final question for you, I guess, and that is about direct democracy. It's a bit of a buzzword of late. I'd say there is certainly a push for more of it. Do your findings then speak for or against more direct democracy?
It's a very good question. We have some evidence here that the direct democracy can change our behavior. And that's a very nice result. But that's only one step toward understanding a democracy. There are many more questions remain unanswered here. So in our experiment, we see that the behavior change in favor of the more moral behavior. Is it always the case? That's the matter of the question. I have a little bit personal view here. And I would say that we should not really implement or make any final conclusion unless we have a consistent picture about how voting and direct democracy change our behavior. So we should leave the status quo as it is and do not change it based on any ideology or speculations about the effect, and try to do more study about democracy, voting systems, and also interesting different types of the democracy and voting system, and try to see what exactly the effect is and how it's going to work. So I'm going to use an example of the taking a pill. So we don't take a pill unless we are sure about effect and side effect, and unless we talk to our doctor about it. So we don't take a pill as such because we probably have a speculation of how it works. So maybe a closing line here, it would be that we legal scholars should take social science more seriously and try to use their method to first validate our assumptions about the human behavior and trying to give a better picture of what exactly happened in the real.
Okay. Well, Mahdi, that's a very good note to wrap things up on there. At least in my opinion, neither of us have slacked off today, so I think we can both go home with full wallets. But as for Davo, I think he'd better watch out. So, Mahdi, thanks so much for joining me on the Lawcast today. I found it very informative and a really interesting chat. Thanks for listening to the Lawcast. If you'd like more information about Max Planck Law, or if you'd like to get involved, please visit us at law.mpg.de.
Max Planck Law. Excellence in legal research.